Please be seated. Well, a very good evening to friends and colleagues, to Penny, Bruce's wife, and to his children, I believe, who are listening online. I have to say this is a particularly happy inaugural lecture for me to officiate at. Not only does it provide an opportunity to be back with my tribe, who are looking very well, I must say, but it is meaningful that it celebrates a new incumbent of the Nuffield chair, a post that I held for 12 very happy years at NDA, then NDCN, whilst also being at the wonderful Pembroke College. I'm confident, Bruce, that you will be very happy in the role and in our community, so a very warm welcome to Oxford. And may I here acknowledge and thank Professor Andrew Farmery for holding the fort as interim head of NDA over the past few years until such time as we were fortunate to land Bruce Biccard, who is, of course, our new Nuffield Professor of Anaesthetic Science at the University of Oxford. His research interests include perioperative medicine, perioperative outcomes and global surgery. He is a proponent of international collaborative research. He collaborates with the African Perioperative Research Group, which has delivered the African Surgical Outcome Study, ASOS, the ASOS-2 trial, the African COVID-19 Critical Care Outcome Study, the African Surgical Outcome Study in pediatric patients, and the African Critical Illness Outcome Study. He is the co-lead for the NIHR Global Health Group on perioperative and critical care, and he is a National Research Foundation A-rated scientist. Bruce has published a book entitled Safer Surgery for Africa, Challenges and Solutions. Bruce, we are delighted to have you join us. Thank you for taking a punt and coming to rainy Oxford, and we wish you every success and happiness going forwards. Please would you all join me in welcoming Professor Biccard to the stage to deliver his inaugural lecture.
Good evening. It's quite overwhelming to see so many friends, family. Vice Chancellor Irene, thanks very much for your kind words. All esteemed guests and my colleagues, it's nice to have you all here. This was something that was never on my radar. And it's been really a fantastic experience to arrive here and feel the warmth and the support of everyone here, so thank you. I'm going to talk about safer surgery and anesthesia, global health imperative. And I knew the first thing that's going to happen is that my anesthetic colleagues are going to be irritated because I put surgery before anesthesia. And it was very intentional. The first thing is to know that anesthesia is very safe. So I'm going to go back to my alma mater. This is Gaisford Harrison. He was professor and head of anesthetics at the University of Cape Town, retired the year before I started started medicine in Cape Town. He's most well known for his work on dantrolene and malignant hypothermia. But also, he really was a good epidemiologist, and he tracked surgical outcomes from the perspective of anesthesia, and had a history of over 3 decades of anesthesia outcomes at Groote Schuur Hospital, and he tracked this improvement in outcome. And I think it's really important for people to understand that anesthesia is becoming incredibly safe. And in fact, the morbidity that we see in the surgical space really comes from the surgical pathology and the surgical insult. And I think we've got 2 responsibilities now, which I'm going to touch on. The first is to ensure that surgery remains safe. And this is with the increasing age and complexity of our patients, that it's difficult to keep on this trajectory. And the second thing is the need for everyone to have access to safe surgery and anesthesia, and not just some. So, my lecture's got 3 parts. It's a very novel approach. I decided to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, the beginning is where I come from. This is for the social scientists in the audience. The middle is about why I'm here, and this is for the clinician scientists and the nerds. And the last part is about where we must go, and that's for the philosophers. So you can choose which third you want to be awake for. So where do I come from? So there's a philosophy in Africa known as Ubuntu. I am because we are, and a person is a person through people. And I think I'm not a person who looks back at all. I really just look forward all the time. So this has been quite a difficult part for me, looking back on from where I came. And the clear thing is, the people I've lived with have shaped and formed me. And I'm here because of so many people. Today I'll mention some people, but it doesn't mean they're any more important than the people I don't mention. In fact, if you look at our research and you click on all the authors and collaborators, you'll see 2,000 people in a lot of the publications. And those people really have enabled me to be here today. So thank you. So where I come from, reflecting on my past, I think the sort of themes that came up for me when I was thinking about this are really about discrimination and inequality, about determination, and about people. So I was born into a middle-class South African family. My father was a salesman. He extremely determined, hard, difficult person, who really never warmed to medicine. I could never really get him to enjoy the excitement that we all share here. And it's sad that he's not here today. I think he was a frustrated intellectual. He was super intelligent, but just really, really difficult. And I often think of him a bit like Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman. Then on the other side was the total opposite, was my mother. She was a midwife in District 6 before the forced removals of the apartheid regime. And then she was a orthopedic sister at Princess Alice Hospital in Retreat. In fact, the orthopods are going to pop up too much in my talk. She was loving, caring, empathetic. I started school at Rondebosch Boys in 1976. So this is like a real white, liberal, middle-class environment. Most of the families voted for the Progressive Federal Party, which meant that you sort of said, what the government's doing is wrong, but you still continue to live this life, this sheltered, privileged life. In 1976, when I started school, was the Soweto uprising. So at the exact same time I started school, there were kids who were demonstrating because of the apartheid policy of Bantu education, meaning that the children would be educated in Afrikaans language medium. Hector Peterson, a 12-year-old, was the first child killed. Sorry. This was a world completely removed from my world. And that's how I spent my primary school. So I moved to, thanks, sorry. Let me try to compose myself. I'll be better, I promise you. Thanks. So my family moved to Johannesburg, and I went to JPI school for boys. Its motto, 14 nihil difficilius. Nothing is too difficult for the brave. This was totally different to my primary school. So yeah, we had this beautiful Sir Herbert Baker building, and you'll see that Time magazine cover, I think it's maybe from about 10 or 15 years ago, about how unequal South Africa is. JP was just like that. So you can see Primrose on the cover of the Time magazine. It's not far from JP. So JP was a government school where we had immigrants from Mozambique, Portugal, who were trying to eke out a living down on JP Street with vegetable stores and cafes. We had gangsters. I saw boys stabbed on those very steps in front of the headmaster's office. And he went off to Boys Town for rehabilitation. There were boys who were beaten by their fathers, who were policemen. And then there were actually very affluent kids as well, whose fathers were captains of the industry. So a real cauldron of the inequality of society in South Africa. I think what it did was it created a community of boys who worked together, who wanted to survive. There's something very special about JP. Jonathan Jansen, who's an educationist in South Africa, probably the foremost educationist, who's been Vice-Chancellor at Free State University and has held other really important positions. He wrote a beautiful piece on JP in the early 2000s in a book called Great South African Teachers. And it's really about the ethos in that school. So even though there's so much inequality, there's a common purpose. And I think that purpose comes in part from this, the school motto, that the kids really believe that nothing's too difficult for them. And I think over time I inculcated this for me to, I will prevail. And I think that has become part of me. At the same time, I think, JP had like this really steep hierarchy. You knew your place. And I escaped it by rowing. So I enjoyed the pain and the beauty of rowing. And I think with time, that if you're not suffering, you're not living. A philosophy that I have started there. To the point that this is my favorite and only picture or portrait that I like of myself is this one. So, you do rowing, and then you do the comrades, and then you do the doozy, and then you do the Ironman, and then you do the race across South Africa. So race across South Africa it's a bike race with mapping. It's about 2,000 Ks. You get lost, you sleep rough, but you experience the beauty of South Africa. And this was taken after me, a friend and myself, trying to make a gate that they closed for 18 hours because of the buffalo in the area. So it was deemed too dangerous to navigate on your own at night. So they had these gate times, and my friend and I worked out that we needed to ride for 72 hours to make the gate, or we would have to wait at the gate for another 18 hours. So this photo is taken after riding for 72 hours, made it through the gate, and then it doesn't matter, you can go as slow as you want. And anyway, that race ended in a disaster. I pulled the plug 50 k's from the end because I was delirious, and I knew I was, and I thought, it's not going to look good for anesthesia if I die in a club, and I'm supposed to be intellectual. So that was bad. And then the next year, I had about 3 days, and I had a bad crash, and smashed my shoulder, and got to know the orthopods. And I got to know, one, the beauty of anesthesia and surgery. Being a patient, when you're not a patient, you never really know what it's like. I really had big shoulder surgery, and it was such a positive experience, both in the care I got from my colleagues and the experience of the surgical experience. So I always thought I was determined because of 14 Nihil difficilius. But now reflecting, when I look back, I actually did the August cycle tour, which people now know as the Cape Town cycle tour, when I was 11. And so it was before I got to JP, so I didn't even know about 14 Nihil difficilius. And I think probably my determination then had come from my father, trying to show him, I can do this stuff. So it's probably a combination of my father and JP which made me quite determined. JP was interesting because I was there in the height of apartheid, and it was a government school. And so there wasn't outright discussion of apartheid, but there were 2 teachers who really made an impression on me, and they, in a way, tried to inculcate an understanding of what was going on in the country. And I think they did it mainly through books. This is one of my favorite books, is To Kill a Mockingbird, and about, you never really know a man until you stand in his shoes. So that was the beginning, but I was still pretty naive to what was going on in South Africa, and then I go to UCT. 1988. That's sort of when my eyes were opened. So it was known as Moscow on the Hill. This is 1989. This is the Purple Rain protest, mass democratic movement. The police arrived. They had purple dye in a water cannon. And what they did is they used it so they could chase down the demonstrators and they could detain them. Some of the people I rode with at Varsity were dyed purple. And so this was like really the first time I really started to understand what was going on. And Stuart Saunders was the VC at UCT at the time. He was a world-leading physician, but a really impressive man in that he managed to somehow keep the police off the campus. A very powerful sign of strength. Then it goes to 1990. Today is a very special day. Nelson Mandela was released on this day 36 years ago. I was in my 3rd year at medical school now, and he was released, and he was going to do his first talk at the Grand Parade in Cape Town. I felt extremely anxious to go. Well, anxious about going. I knew I was going to go, but I was anxious about going. I thought, what's going to happen to me being a white South African going to Nelson's first speech when he's free, and he's been incarcerated for 27 years by white South Africans. And in preparation for this talk, this really bothered me, and I've spoken to colleagues of mine who were at university with me. And it's quite interesting the range of responses I got. I got from, I was really scared, I didn't go, to I felt anxious and I went, like me, to people who said I was excited and I went. And the interesting thing is a lot had to do with their background. People who had been educated in private schools probably had a much better feel for what was going on in the country than people like myself who had been in a very hardcore government school in the center of Johannesburg. Last night, I reread Nelson's chapter on this day, From Long Walk to Freedom. And it was interesting how I couldn't actually remember how big the crowds were, but when you read his account, that basically the whole car was totally swarmed with people to the point that they felt that if they could die in the car because people were just so excited at his release and the fact that he was going to address the nation. So, yeah, it was a momentous day and it was a very exciting day, and I was completely wrong to be nervous. I was totally safe, had a great time, and the next year it was 1994, when he published Long Walk to Freedom. And I think that was the first time that I really understood South Africa. So I feel embarrassed that it took me that long. I said books are important to me, so 2 books that I read repeatedly are these 2 books. They set me straight. To Kill a Mockingbird teaches one about empathy, and 1984, wow, scary. So, just thinking about South Africa, what's the equivalent book if someone wants to understand South Africa? I think you have to read Cry the Beloved Country. And I read that book repeatedly as well. And if you want the equivalent of 1984, you've got to read Under It Brings a Dry White Season. This is like a real-life horror story book. I've read it once. It is brilliant, and I will never, ever read it again. Okay, that's a hard part done. Okay, but we're still in only the social science. Okay, so people. So in university, I had inspirational teachers. These are the 2 standout people. Lionel Opie, colleague of Pierre Foy, did his DPhil in the NDA. Fantastic man, his daughter was in my class. Solly Benatar. Solly Benatar trained to be an anaesthetist, then became a physician, became a world-leading physician in tuberculosis and a world-leading ethicist. Amazing man. Before I left to come here, he was still sharing readings or writings of his with me on equality, poverty, equity. Inspirational activists. I spoke about Stuart Saunders. Stuart Saunders was inspirational in that how one man can stand up to a regime. And then Zaki Ahmed, when the government wouldn't give people antiretrovirals, he got a community to stand up against the government and change the rules. Two inspirational people. And then my class. So, thinking of when I was at university, I was so prejudiced, I thought, there are only a few cool people. And then at our 25-year reunion, it happens just before COVID breaks. So a class WhatsApp group is created, and then COVID hit. It was the most amazing place. The honesty, the care across the globe. It's wonderful. I don't usually cry in talks. I've got so weak. I need to toughen up. Right. So, I finished university. I knew one thing. I will never be an anaesthetist. That's all I knew. So I go off to Victoria Hospital, beautiful little community hospital in Wynberg, Cape Town, do my anesthetics. I think we have to do 40 or something as interns, I can't remember. I enjoy it so much. And my colleagues there say, you need to go to Edendale and KwaZulu-Natal, do the DA, and then you'll know if you want to be an anaesthetist. And thanks to them and anesthesia, that's how I met Penny. So Penny is my loving wife sitting over there, who's taught me about empathy and families, taught me how to speak. It's quite difficult when you've got Asperger's. But yeah, and so I met Penny through anesthesia, and we got two beautiful children, Duncan and Robin. Unfortunately, they couldn't stay for tonight, and they've returned to Cape Town. But I really love you guys. I know they're watching. They've been really stoic. It hasn't been easy for them, for us to move here. But they've always been supportive, and they've allowed me to chase my dreams. So thanks, Dunks, and thanks, Robs. So Edendale, there was supposed to be, this was like a typical South African education. See one, do one, teach one. So, and then you're expert. So Gary Minto, who's one of the leading lights in the Southeast in anesthesia, was one of my teachers. He had done like 2 days of anesthesia. He taught me one, and then I taught someone else one, something like that. But we had the most fantastic teacher, Jenny King. She's probably got the highest conversion rate of diplomats to anaesthetists in South Africa. And she was recognized by the WFSA for the work she does in this conversion rate. And so to Jenny, thank you. Which brings me to Oxford. This is my third time in Oxford. The first time I left because I was an African. This is the third time, and I returned because I'm an African. But we will get to that. The first time, I had been doing some locuming, then did locum registrar time, and then was told, no, there's a post being advertised, why don't you apply for a proper reg post? And Penny and I chatted, and that's when we decided we're Africans, we want to be in Africa. When we went back, and I trained in South Africa. And the people in South Africa have really looked after me in KwaZulu-Natal, in the department there, and then later at the University of Cape Town. But what happened in that first visit to Oxford is I heard Pierre talk. I was obviously so junior I couldn't talk to him, but I did hear him talk, and it was very inspirational. And through my training, the sort of work Pierre was involved in, I was really interested in. And so there was an opportunity for Nuffield scholarship. And I applied, and I didn't get it. But a colleague, one of my classmates, Nandy Siegfried, got that fellowship that I had applied for. And in retrospect, this is the output from that work. It was probably better that she got it, because I think from an impact perspective, this was a huge moment in managing HIV. But what it had done is I was forced to meet Pierre, and Pierre made a space for me, and I came over for my second time to Oxford, and had the most amazing mentorship from Pierre and John. So I was young and enthusiastic about perioperative cardiovascular medicine. And not once did they tell me I was wrong, but I learned I was wrong often. And they used to just say to me, I think you should read this. Every time they said, I think you should read this, it meant, you really don't understand this topic. But they educated me in the nicest way. They're great mentors. And because of them, I ended up then working with PJ Devereaux from McMaster. PJ had been mentored by Salim Yusuf, who had done his DPhil at Oxford. He did the first randomized control trial with beta blockers in myocardial infarction, and it was called ISIS. And it's taken me to my third visit to Oxford to realize why I use that acronym. So I apologize that I'm so mentally slow. And then the other person that PJ had been mentored by was Dave Sackett. And so I got to meet these three wonderful people and learned a lot about evidence-based medicine and clinical trials. And these were, I would say, heady days of cardiovascular research. There's a signal of death in the perioperative period. There was this description of a new pathology, myocardial injury after non-cardiac surgery, and the implications that it has for long-term outcomes. I would suggest now that we're in the same space with perioperative brain health now. We got the same problem that people were trying to deal with cardiovascular outcomes before. Yeah, we have postoperative cardiac cognitive dysfunction. It's a perioperative pathology, and it's got definite long-term outcomes. It's a recent described phenomenon. Literature really only just took off after 2015. It is common. So this is a systematic review of patients 60 years and older. 1 in 4 have cognitive dysfunction at day 7. 25% of our surgical patients. Quite mind-blowing. 1 in 10 still have cognitive dysfunction at 3 months. So Tim Cook's sitting in the... There's Tim. He's trying to lay low. Tim Cook has led the national audit projects, and it's phenomenal work, but because of that, we know that in the NHS, 1 in 4 patients who have surgery is more than 69 years old. This is a real issue, cognitive function for us here. And this is not just a high-income country problem, because the life expectancy, even in Africa now, exceeds 60. And so this is going to be a global problem which we need to address. Similar to perioperative cardiovascular medicine, it's really a combination of two things, of inflammation and vascular disease. This is the challenge we have. We know that Gaisford Harrison, for example, has shown us that anesthesia and surgery is getting safer. And we know that from Tim Cook's work that the age and complexity of our patients is getting worse. What we have to do is we have to push the boundary to ensure that we can continue to provide safe surgery and anesthesia in this changing surgical population. This is the discovery science priority, I think, for us here. But why am I here? So this is the second part for the nerds, because I believe I can do more for Africa in Oxford than I can do for Africa in Africa. These are, what I'm going to talk about is work that's been done by the African Perioperative Research Group. These are their sort of main studies, which spans adults, children, critical illness, mothers. This is the sort of scope of the work. Over 70,000 patients recruited. There are about 43 countries in this group now, about 2,000 clinician investigators. I think it's about 400 hospitals across the continent. This work has been done largely unfunded, and I think it's really important to remember that. And so I am actually here because of amazing work that all these people have done. I'm going to touch on a few people now. So firstly, to Rupert Pearce, who's also sitting in the audience, thank you. Rupert opened up a very pragmatic methodology to us, shared his resources, and supported us and got us on the road. After I'd heard him talk about the European Surgical Outcome Study in London, I didn't know him, flew back to South Africa and then emailed him when I could have just walked up to the stage or podium and asked him a question, but I was a bit nervous. And anyway, he shared everything with us. He supported us in the South African Surgical Outcome Study and then helped us move towards African Surgical Outcome Study. And that brings me to the second person, Prof. Madiba. So Prof. Madiba, or Tandon Nkosi Madiba, was head of surgery in KwaZulu-Natal. At the time, we wanted to launch the African Surgical Outcome Study. So we had no network. We had an idea and we had a methodology which has been shared with us. So between Prof. Madiba and myself, we cold called Africa. So our modus operandi was, if someone responds to you, you ask them to introduce you to anyone. And if an anesthetist doesn't respond to me, then if the surgeon responds to Prof. Madiba, that works. And either way, we will prevail. And we did. So, the African Surgical Outcome Study, these are the investigators. There are 1,095 of them. These were 1,095 people who agreed to work with us on blind trust. We had no history, no nothing. I mean, that's a real testament to humanity. Next person is Hela Klates. So she created basically what's known as Safe Surgery South Africa, which is a data administration network to support the work we're doing. Again, an NGO, very difficult to fund, and she's been resolute in ensuring that it is maintained and it stays established. And it's allowed us actually to run from ASOS all the way through. All the studies have been run on that platform. And then Alex Storborg, who is an anaesthetic colleague of mine, who then took the concept and developed the pediatric surgical outcome study, and she also is responsible for me actually finishing a book. I'd been writing, and then I was going to fail, and she said no. And she helped me do podcasts, and the next thing, there was a book. So thanks to Alex as well. So the African surgical outcome study was really grim. What we showed is that you're twice as likely to die if you have surgery in Africa, and that these deaths follow complications, a concept known as failure to rescue. And thank you, Rupert, who helped us develop a very simple narrative that people could understand the story. A very sad story, which created an urgency in our network. And how do you respond to people who are having surgery who die twice as likely than if they had it anywhere else in the world, but you got no money? So we just got this network, and what do we do? And so then this comes to Leon Dutoy, who's come here from St. Louis. He's here as well. Leon helped us with this, developing this pragmatic trial. So when you got no money, you can't measure anything. So what you have to do is you have to use the only objective thing you got, and that's death. And if you're using death as your outcome, your sample size explodes. So if you're running at a 2% mortality and you want to drop that by 25%, we're looking at like 60,000 patients. But we will prevail. And so we just did it. We intended to randomize 600 hospitals across the continent, trying to increase post-operative surveillance to decrease failure to rescue. The study got to 30,000, and then COVID hit, and then it got really complicated because some countries didn't even have PPE. It was difficult, and then we closed the study, or the trial. I apologize, the trial. So this is epic fail. This is failure at scale. So here are outcomes. There is like zero difference. You got no idea how much work went into this, and this is what we end up with, no difference. So at this point, I'm going to take a little segue, because I think we need to think about John Snow. So John Snow is a famous anaesthetist. He administered chloroform to Queen Victoria, I think it was 1853 for Leopold, and then like 1857 for Beatrice. So he made anesthesia in the obstetric place socially acceptable. But the other thing is, he was a founder of epidemiology. Amazing man. He had been involved in the cholera outbreak in 1849, one of the founding members of the Epidemiological Society of London, 1850. So now 1854. This is a famous map that John Snow produced. So there was a baby, Frances Lewis, who died of cholera. Her linen had been washed near the Broad Street pump, infected the water, and John Snow, he must have been OCD, but like me, he counted. And all those bars are deaths. And he sort of navigated it towards the Broad Street pump. But the interesting thing are the two yellow boxes. And this is about the context. Here near the Broad Street pump in the brewery, there are no deaths. So how does that happen? Well, if you can drink liquor at work, well, you don't need to go and get water. And they all thought it was a good idea. Not one of them drank from the Broad Street pump. They all survived. And then the other was the workhouse, which had a few deaths, but they had their own well in the workhouse. And they reckon that if there was no well there, more than 100 people would have died in that workhouse. Anyway, like a seminal moment was John Snow convincing, I can't remember what the organization is, but anyway, that they can take the handle for Broad Street pump, and that is a real marker in epidemiology. But the point of this story is the context, understanding the context of the outcome. So we had failed at scale. And when we were setting up the trial, Rupert says to me, you need a process evaluation, and having had no formal education and being a bit stupid, I didn't know what a process evaluation was, and we did it. And Nikki Vickery, who is in the